Welcome. So good to see you here, and so good. We have so far about 25 people joining us online, so which is great. If anyone doesn't know me, I am Rabbi Karen, the rabbi here at Woodstock, the second Woodstocker Rebbe. It's a lineage I'm very proud now to be part of, a wonderful lineage. And just a few things before we get started. First of all, we all know how embarrassing it is when our cell phones go off in the middle of something. And I want to save you all from embarrassment. So please turn your volumes off on your phones. We will be recording today's session. So just so that you know that, so we'll have that recording available. You do not need to be responsible yourselves for videotaping the session. We'll provide that for you. And also, just so you know, we will be recording the session and we will be inviting interaction, primarily for people here in the room, but if you're on Zoom, there may be some opportunity to ask questions, to type in the chat, so just so you know that. So if you do not want to be on camera, that's fine. We can ask you a question on your behalf, but we'll also pass the microphone around. Emergency exits, there's an exit on this side over here, the front door, and toward the back of the building. Bathrooms are down the hall and to the right. And Barbara Sarah has come into the room. Welcome, Barbara. Yay. An illustrious community member. What an honor. All right, it is now my honor to introduce Judy Kerman, who was the mastermind of this gathering today. And I will pass the floor over to you.
Thank you, Rabbi Karen. Yes, it has been a concern of mine for a very long time to think about what Jewishness means in counterpoise to the existence of Israel, in counterpoise to the Zionist philosophy, which in certain circles is that if we stay here, we're not really Jews anymore, or Judaism isn't a thing you can do outside of Israel anymore now that Israel is a state. And I thought it was something we needed to have a conversation about. So I approached Larry Bush, who's an old friend of mine, and whose view of these I have a little bit of information about, and thought maybe we could have a program. And I think it was Rabbi Karen who suggested that we do this as a conversation with Rabbi Jonathan, who I know is thinking about these issues and has for many years. So I don't think I need to say more, except that this should be a very interesting conversation. And I'm glad to have you.
You want this mic?
Okay. Oh, it is on.
Now it's, yep.
So I'm going to start by saying I hope this doesn't disappoint folks. By that I mean this conversation is not a conversation about what Israel's doing in the world right now. It's not a conversation about the politics of Israel now. It's a conversation about the essences of Jewish identity and the diaspora sense of being Jewish and how it does or doesn't dovetail with Israel's existence, Israel's culture, Israel's purpose, Israel's history. I also want to say that I'm absolutely no expert when it comes to Israel. I've been there once for a month when my daughter spent a year course between high school and college. I was not raised in a Zionist movement or with any particular connection to Israel. I've always been a non-Zionist, as to distinguish from an anti-Zionist. What I would have been in 1943 when the reform movement in America was fiercely debating what should their relationship to Zionism be, where I would have stood, I don't know in the middle of slaughter. But I know what I bring to this conversation is just that I am, a committed diaspora Jew because I was a professional Jew, a certain amount of knowledge of the history and the culture and so on. And I don't want to make any claims beyond that. So I want to start with a joke in classic form. So the scene is a bench in Jerusalem. There's an old woman sitting with a young boy. It's grandma and grandson, and she says something to him in Yiddish, and he replies in Hebrew. And she says something to him in Yiddish, and he replies in Hebrew. And he says something in Hebrew, and she replies in Yiddish. And this goes back and forth until an interested passerby says to her, "Why do you keep speaking to him in Yiddish? When he's speaking Hebrew, why do you keep speaking to him in Yiddish?" And she says, "I want him to know he's Jewish." So the question to set the table for my contribution to this is, why is that joke so funny? Why is that joke so funny? Someone give me a response. Erwin.
Okay, I believe it's funny because on the one hand, the idea of Zionism is that Israel is essential to Jewish identity, and in the diaspora where she is from, it's a different definition of what is Jewish. And that's the joke.
Any other comments on that? Go ahead.
Well, Yiddish is the language of our Jewish, you say four people? Sorry. Yiddish is the language of our Jewish, I don't want to say forefathers, four people, whatever that is. And Hebrew is the language of Israel, and many Israelis are completely secular, and they may be Jewish by birth, but they're not Jewish in any religious or ritualistic way.
Elena.
We're using the mic so the people on Zoom can hear.
I would have thought that being Jews, we could all talk loud enough to not need the mic, but anyway.
Not with Zoom.
Most of the people in this room anyway are New York Jews, and who, whether or not we grew up in Zionist circles or not, we grew up with notions of Bubby and Zadie on the Lower East Side and the shtetl that they came from, and our sense of Yiddishkeit comes from that, even, whatever our relationship to Israel is. And so we get the joke. We laugh because we actually get what the old woman means.
I would just add, I don't think it's a joke I would tell in Israel, because they wouldn't find it funny. Jonathan.
And Yiddish is the mama lashon.
And it's important to point out that this is an Ashkenazi-centric response. There are millions of Jews from other countries who don't know from Yiddish. So we have to keep our specific Yiddishkeit Jewishness, unless someone here is not descended from Eastern European Jews, understand that that's our in-group, and Jewishness is actually much larger than that, and something to keep in mind as we continue this conversation.
So, your turn.
My turn already? Mm-hmm. I am thrilled to be here, both because it's really wonderful to start to be able to participate again now that Rabbi Karen's taken over. And also, Larry and I have a wonderful and long history. I love talking to Larry. And let's see, I guess my framing remarks, I'll put it this way. When Zionism was cooked up in the late 19th century, it was a revolutionary movement. Revolutionary movements are about transforming history, changing it all, toppling the old order and creating something new, right? And the goal was to create a new Jew who would be safe and strong, and so early Zionist ideology was that the Jews of exile, the Jews of the diaspora, were debased, that Yiddish was in fact a jargon, not a real language. That there was this effort to literally recreate a new kind of Jewish experience, and that was Zionism. And so naturally, especially in its most strident forms, demeaned and the diaspora experience. That wasn't all of Zionism. There were much more reality-based Jews as well, who understood that if it was going to be a successful project of building a Jewish civilization, a Jewish society in our ancestral homeland, that by definition, not everyone would want to move there, and that there should be a vibrant relationship between the diaspora and Israel, whatever the outcome. So but Zionism in its most extreme expression demeaned the diaspora. So that I don't know if you ever met anyone in Israel who said to you, you have to move here. This is the only place you can really be Jewish, right? And that's an attitude. You'll still run into it all the time in Israel. Okay. In the meantime, there were other Jewish revolutionary movements in the 19th century that were focused on Yiddish and were socialist mostly and communist in essence, for whom the idea of creating a Jewish nation was anathema to their universalist aspirations. And for them, they wanted to create a Yiddish culture and a Yiddish Jewish national identity, but not a national identity, but a collective identity that would participate in the unfolding of the new world order that their revolutionary instincts were headed towards. So there was, from an early time, this real, tension and between Zionist identity and a diasporist identity.
Two examples to add. One is that the Reform movement, as I noted, until Israel was established, the Reform movement, Reform Synagogue movement, which became the largest, denomination in the United States, was fundamentally anti-Zionist. Before Herzl invented the movement in 1885, the Reform movement had the Pittsburgh Platform, in which they specifically said the aspiration to return to Zion is we give it up. We want to be, we define ourselves as Americans of a certain religion. We laugh about it and call it assimilationist, but in some ways it was very real. America offered the opportunity to be Americans of a certain religion as opposed to a people who had been ghettoized, who had been separated, who had been treated. There was someone else in America who could be treated that way. The Jews didn't have to be. So the Reform movement had all this ambivalence about Zionism, about Jewish nationalism. And Orthodox Jews of a certain stripe saw the reestablishment of Israel before Mashiach comes, before the Messiah comes, as a heresy, as a sin. And you can make fun of that, but if you interpret it, one could say, one argument I would make is that Messiah comes when the human beings have worked it out. The Talmud has all of these neat stories about when Messiah comes, and most of them involve, when all Jews do the Sabbath perfectly twice. It's twice because the first time might have been a mistake, so you have to know it's deliberate. When all Jews observe the Sabbath, Messiah will come. Kafka has a line about, Messiah will only come when Messiah is no longer necessary. The idea that Messiah is the reward for human beings working it out is a way of interpreting the Orthodox opposition to Zionism as a heresy.
Good. So Larry's expanding, and that's very important. There were the Yiddishists, the socialist Yiddishists, there were the Zionists, and many stripes of both kinds. And then the Reform movement. So it's important for us to recognize that all these movements emerged in the 19th century because that's when the Jews have been, as it was described, emancipated from the ghetto. And once emancipated from the ghetto, the traditional glue that held Jewish life together was gone. So Jews scrambled for the last 200 years to figure out how to be Jewish in a world where we are also citizens of different nations, where we are, and this is a complicated question. That was not, before the modern era, we were not faced with those questions, right? The question was how to survive, but not how to be Jewish so that we can make our way in the world and still be Jewish, right? So another response was the Reform movement, which began in Germany and then came to the United States with the German Jews in the 1850s. And that was, we will redefine Judaism, which until now has been our collective experience of living together. As we will redefine Judaism as a faith. That will allow us to become Germans of the Mosaic faith, or Americans of the United American Hebrew congregations. And so by reducing, and I call it reducing, but I'm not saying this harshly, everyone was trying to figure out how to participate in this emerging modernity. To do so, we are going to redefine ourselves as a faith so that we are not thought of as a fifth column in any nation we live in, because we're trying to get accepted in that nation. And so that Reform was adamantly opposed to Jewish nationalism because it went against everything that they understood as the solution to being a Jew in the modern world.
So may I add a highlight?
Am I saying that fairly?
Yeah. So let me add a highlight. One of the pioneers of Reform Judaism in America was a rabbi named David Einhorn, who was most active in Baltimore at the time of the Civil War. Now, Baltimore was a part of the Union, but it was a slave state. Maryland was a slave state, and Baltimore had both the largest free black population in America and a very large immigrant population, but it also had a lot of slave owners. And there were riots in Baltimore when that forced the Union to garrison the city. So the Union soldiers garrisoned the city. But during that time, David Einhorn was an abolitionist rabbi, very outspoken against slavery within his congregation and on a national format. There were debates between him and Morris Raphael about the legitimacy of slavery, and they were like really intense debates. I mean, he pulled no punches. And he was driven out of Baltimore by the rioters, the pro-slavery rioters, under threat of being tarred and feathered, and he moved to Philadelphia and resumed his pastoral life in Philadelphia. He was an innovator in many ways around Judaism, and one of the things that David Einhorn proposed was that Tisha B'Av, traditionally the day of fasting and mourning about the destruction of the Jewish polity in Palestine, the destruction of the temples, we mourn it. He suggested that it be a festival day because it was then that Jews went out into the world with their prophetic mission to be a light unto the nations. He proposed that we should not be mourning the destruction of the homeland, nation-state, priesthood, temple system, but rather that we should celebrate it as the way Jews with their portable synagogues, with their portable language, I mean, the socialists saw Yiddish as like a portable Torah of their own, Jews were awakened to their mission in the world. And I have to say, I'm very sympathetic to this point of view. This is my Judaism in many ways.
Beautiful. So I'll respond to that in a second, but first I want to continue with the other group Larry brought up, which was the traditionally Orthodox Jews, for whom Zionism was treif. You know what treif means? Just not kosher. Why? Because the early Zionists were all were secularizing Jews. They wanted the new Jewish identity that they were forging for the modern era to be a national identity. Why? Because the world was reorganizing as nation states. And this seemed to the Zionists to be the obvious and only path. Also, everyone, you can never forget, and this is why we have to have compassion both on our ancestors and on all of us. Everyone was contending with anti-Semitism, trying to figure out how to be safe enough, how not to get killed. That was all these groups. Okay, so let's just keep that in mind. We weren't operating in like a pleasant environment. Okay, just remember that. Keep your history hats on. Okay, so the Orthodox, they couldn't accept Zionism. It was a secularizing nationalist movement, and and I want you to point out that orthodoxy in its modern form is another response to modernity, because the Orthodox said we are going to put a wall up against modernity, right? And that's how we're going to cope with it. You know, like the Amish or other groups that just simply say we're stopping time, we're not playing along, right? And so that was another response to this incredibly dislocating experience for all humanity, all human beings, of the transition into this modern world. Universalism. Universalism, the very idea that we're a human family, is a modern concept, right? It's not a pre-modern idea. There are seeds of this pre-modern idea, especially in Judaism, because it says in the Torah, God created the human being in the divine image, and therefore all humans are created in the divine image. And so the fundamental parity of all humanity is part of our Jewish tradition. But in the modern era, this idea emerged that the solution to this new turmoil is that we have to all be part of the same human family. This is a problematic concept, because for many Jews, the only way to be part of this so-called and very Eurocentric idea of a universal human family was to not be Jewish, or because universalism was such a flawed concept, right? It was about imposing an idea of our oneness, and if you're not, I heard this great line, to remember that other people are not a failed version of me. Right? I've been thinking about that a lot, and I'm not a failed version of other people either, right? So, but we're not necessarily one human family.
On the other hand, while it's a flawed concept because of who human beings
on the other hand,
because of who human beings are, and because of patriarchy, and because of our hierarchical natures, and because of our rapid tendency to other people, universalism is hard, but not something to be surrendered.
Nope.
And I would argue that two things. One is that Jews, as I love them, are very oriented still towards non-othering of people. Jews recognize racism and oppose it, by and large, or try to recognize it and oppose it. They're generally instead of celebrating othering, instead of hunkering down into our separateness and our nations and our otherness, Jews and the Judaism they carry go the opposite way. And one way of doing that, and this I think has very affected me, is I think Jews sought to project that universalism onto America, onto other, and the example of it is Lenny Bruce's Jewish and Goyish routine, which surely most of you know. I'm going to read you a little of the Jewish and Goyish routine. Dig, he begins, I'm Jewish. Count Basie's Jewish. Ray Charles is Jewish. Eddie Cantor's Goyish. B'nai B'rith is Goyish. Hadassah, Jewish. Marine Corps, heavy Goyim, dangerous. Everyone living in New York or any other big city is Jewish, even if you're Catholic. If you live in New York, you're Jewish. But if you live in Butte, Montana, you're going to be Goyish even if you're Jewish. And then he surveys grocery shelves. Chocolate is Jewish, but fudge is Goyish. Fruit salad is Jewish. So are pumpernickel bread and black cherry soda. All Drake's cakes, white breads, and instant potatoes are Goyish. Negroes are all Jews, he continues. Italians are all Jews, as are Irishmen who have rejected their religion. Mouths are very Jewish and bosoms. Balls are Goyish. So, this is from an article I wrote about this routine and about Lenny Bruce a few years ago from Jewish Currents. Bruce's routine was all about Jewish comfort, idealism, and chutzpah. It expressed Jewish clannishness by extending it outwards to all of America, or at least to those sectors of America dedicated to creativity, authenticity, and social progress. In a nutshell, Bruce was equating Jewishness with liberalism, anti-racism, universalism, urbanism, hipsterism, and atheism. He was also implying that such virtues can be exported to America at large and that we're the people to do it. So I'm going to read one more paragraph from that, which is how the article ends, just to move us more deeply into this. Today, the Jewish consensus of what is Jewish and Goyish has broken down. Israel's transition from a fearless little socialist state to an occupying power and a rude, hard-driving capitalist country has disrupted the Jewish identification with bosoms instead of balls. So have the gleeful material possibilities of America, which have come to yield a revolting sense of American Jewish entitlement. The likes of Jonas Salk, who refused to patent his polio vaccine because he asked reporters, "Could you patent the sun?" have been replaced by Jewish billionaire CEOs who would patent your brain cells if they could. There is a lack of a moral center in America today, despite Lenny Bruce's best efforts, and we've not succeeded at replacing that broken down morality with menschlichkeit because we ourselves are too Goyish to know how. And I would argue, so I'm going to push the argument, I would argue that Israel's overriding influence as what we taught our children, not me, but our generation taught our children to see that place as the essence of being Jewish, as the center, not a center, but the center, which also meant because of Israel's constantly imperiled existence, that we also saw an alliance with the American industrial military complex, which is already an old term, but it's still valid. In so many ways, Israel tragically tamped down our passion for this and tamped down our commitment to menschlichkeit for fear that we were endangering Israel, for fear that they were the authentic ones, we were not, and for fear that without that center, our Judaism was just going to fade away, which all legitimate fears. But
we're going to do questions soon, Barbara. Hold on to it, okay? Sarah, Barbara, Sarah. I'm glad to see you. It's complicated, isn't it? It's complicated, isn't it? It's impossibly complicated, isn't it? We desperately want to be able to solve this. Breathe. Tragic. We're experiencing a tragic moment, not just in Israel, but in our world right now. I can't fix it. There's an impulse to get heated here. Larry spoke so beautifully. Let's just acknowledge how beautifully Larry spoke. How do we talk about this? I made a commitment after October 7th that I was not going to lose any precious relationships over a war over which I had no control. What a waste that would be. So as passionate as I am, and as engaged and as fiercely opinionated as I am. I'm just not going to do that. I don't want you to do it either. I don't want any of us to do it. I need to say that so that we can keep talking to each other, right? Okay.
I'm going to take this pause to say this. When Jonathan and I had lunch together to prepare for this a couple of weeks ago, I realized how little I've cultivated a relationship to Israel. You know, I was able to say to him, you know, Israel has hardly informed my Jewish cultural consciousness at all. I haven't read Israeli writers and so on. And I walked out of that meeting feeling like, wow, there's this whole realm of being Jewish that I've deprived myself of. Not for ideological reasons, just because I have. I would also say at this juncture that part of the response to Israel and the tragedy of what's going on is to continue to doggedly cultivate a diaspora Jewish identity. Not in the name of diasporism, but in the name of cultivating Jewish identity. There's so much to it, and the things I value about that identity need bolstering.
Mm-hmm. And I'm a different kind of Jew. My grandfather and grandmother moved to Palestine in 1920. My grandfather was a scientist. He was in charge of the effort to eradicate malaria in British Mandate Palestine. He was one of the 5 founders of the Hebrew University. By the way, he succeeded in eradicating malaria. Israel was the first country that had endemic and uncontrollable malaria to eradicate it in the 20th century. That was my grandfather's work. I take no credit. I didn't even know him. He died in 1945. But that's my family story, right? My father was born in Jerusalem. He was a Hebraist. He loved Hebrew. He made sure we grew up speaking Hebrew. I didn't learn Yiddish. Okay, so let's start right there. There's lots of different kinds of Jews. The success of Zionism, among its many successes, was the creation of a full-bodied Hebrew life with literature, music, poetry, newspapers, and that Hebrew, which I was raised on, is astonishing, number one, in that a dead language was revived. The language of prayer and study became a language of everyday use. That was the most unlikely. It's an incredible story. And that now when you read a Hebrew poet today, you can see literary allusions going back 3,000 years. I cherish it. Okay? So when we speak about Jewishness, there is a full-bodied, astonishing Jewishness that is available in Israel. That for me is my cultural foundation because of my family history. My brother moved there 45 years ago. I speak to my great nieces and nephews in Hebrew. It's like we get together for Friday night dinner in their home with a whole clan of little Jewish kids speaking Hebrew. So we have to find a way to say yes and, is what I'm getting at here.
So a question I have for you, Jonathan, is, you know, you spoke to me about the Zionist concept of negation of the exile.
Yeah, I want to speak about that.
And I guess the question I would put on the table is what Israel is now, was it not inevitable when you're building a nation state with a military of necessity, when you are licensing, for whatever reasons, Orthodox rabbinate to control the religious culture. Was there an inevitability that Zionism would not create, little socialist, Yiddish-speaking and Hebrew-speaking? Could it have been different? I mean, the binationalists who wanted to build a joint, Arab-Jewish state were really not of great influence.
My grandfather was part of the binational state movement in the 1930s.
It was the surrendering of the universalist mission of Judaism, the surrendering of a prophetic Judaism inevitably going to lead to what we have today.
Zionism did not have to be a surrendering of the universalist idea of Judaism. There were branches of Zionism that were also universalist. Mm-hmm. They lost the battle for control of the country. That doesn't mean those Jews aren't still there. And when you say fiercely, let's see, you said you were developing a diaspora Jewish identity. I am fiercely dedicated to maintaining and supporting those of my fellow Jews in Israel who are continuing to fight the good fight for a humane and democratic Jewish state. I know these people. These are my beloved friends, and as it happens, my family. And they're also, so it's so damn complex. But we have to remember that we have brothers and sisters in Israel who agree with our politics and our vision of Judaism. And so to lump them all with Israel is like lumping all American Jews together. Also, to talk about the inevitability of where the trajectory of Israel has gotten us to at this moment is to then reflect on the inevitability of all democratic societies devolving, as ours is, into oligarchy, plutocracy, and intolerance. So to single out the Jewish state in particular for failing as a nation, maybe the problem is nation states. Maybe the problem is humanity. And so I beg for discernment in distinguishing between the devolution of the Israeli government military into and the nation into a failed democracy, which it seems to be heading towards, but it hasn't happened yet. And I say that because of all the people there who don't vote for those parties, who are my allies.
Okay.
Okay.
I wanted to bring a little people discussion and not yet question and answer, but a couple of questions that I wanted to toss to you. How much time do we have before an hour's up?
20 minutes.
Great. Did you want to read from
Amos Oz? Shall I read from him now?
Sure.
Okay. So Amos Oz is the famous Israeli author and peace activist who created the Peace Now movement after the Six-Day War, who died just a few years ago. In this book called In the Land of Israel from 1983, this is my favorite quote. It's a page. This is the place to make my first shocking confession. Others will follow. I think that the nation state is a tool, an instrument that is necessary for a return to Zion, but I am not enamored of this instrument. The idea of the nation state is, in my eyes, goyim nachas, a delight for Gentiles. I would be more than happy to live in a world composed of dozens of civilizations, each developing in accordance with its own internal rhythm, all cross-pollinating one another, without anyone emerging as a nation state. No flag, no emblem, no passport, no anthem, no nothing. Only spiritual civilizations tied somehow to their lands without the tools of statehood and without the instruments of war. But the Jewish people has already staged a long-running one-man show of that sort. The international audience sometimes applauded, sometimes threw stones, and occasionally slaughtered the actor. No one joined us. No one copied the model the Jews were forced to sustain for 2,000 years, the model of a civilization without the, quote, tools of statehood, unquote. For me, this drama ended with the murder of Europe's Jews by Hitler, and I am forced to take it upon myself to play the, quote, game of nations, unquote, with all the tools of statehood, even though it causes me to feel, as George Steiner put it, like an old man in a kindergarten. To play the game with an emblem and a flag and a passport and an army and even war, provided that such war is an absolute existential necessity. I accept those rules of the game because existence without the tools of statehood is a matter of mortal danger. But I accept them only up to this point. To take pride in these tools of statehood, to worship these toys, to crow about them, not I. If we must maintain these tools, including the instruments of death, it must be not only with glee, but with wisdom as well. I would say with no glee at all, only with wisdom and with caution. Nationalism itself is, in my eyes, the curse of mankind.
So his argument is beautiful. His argument that the experiment in universalism, the way Jews lived as an international people, ends with the Holocaust. I can't dismiss it, but I also can't accept it. I can't in my heart accept it. I want the Jews to continue to live as a paradigm people, not as a normalized people like any other people. You know, to my mind, as an American Jew, it's like Jewish identity has become a very voluntary thing. You know, we're not forced to be what we are anymore. I mean, you know, it's not, the curtain has pulled aside, it's not gone. There's still a veil, but, and if I cannot be part, if I cannot see being Jewish as part of a mission beyond self-protection, I'll be a Quaker. I'll be a many other things, because there are many other things to be that are easier and more accessible, given I don't have Hebrew, you know. Many ways to be. And so I'm not even theologically, I mean, I'm notorious atheist, but I still have a theology. I'm not even theologically willing to give up the universalist Menschlichkeit mission. I basically, I'm sorry, I said I was going to turn it over to you, but I'm not going to yet. You'll all get a chance. There's, to me, if you boil it down, Judaism is a set of tools to cultivate Menschlichkeit. And I would even argue that it's tools oriented to make men into mention, because it kind of is both sexist and also assumes women don't need it as much. And it's right in that. It's about civilizing men in many ways. And I'm just not willing to fold on that. So if I'm going to also read in counterpoint to Amos Oz from my novel Hyman, which is over sale for $10 over there.
I just read it.
Bargain.
It's really good.
Yeah, you just read it. It was a real honor to have you read it. This is a scene in which Hyman, who is a radical hippie rabbi from a Hasidic background, is in New York City, and he's living with the Hasid still. He is a Hasid, and he's about to be kind of sent into Greenwich Village to proselytize. And he's talking about living in the apartment building where his Rabbi, to whom he's a secretary, lives. And he says, One little Romanian Yiddishists. She wept all day and screamed all night. She lived on the 3rd floor right above your parents, and the Rebbe's men kept saying, "Move her, she's disturbing the Rebbe." But your father said, "No, she doesn't disturb me, she reminds me." He's writing a letter to the son of his Rebbe, who's now the Rebbe, who's a scoundrel. And Erwin and Doris, you've heard this before, forgive me. Those screams became the punctuation for the question that was obsessing me in those years. How could he with a capital H, how could he? In study, in prayer, in conversation, even in my dreams, I was preoccupied with this, determined to redeem God's merciful name by answering this question. How could he? To this day, I cannot abide those scholars who actually believe that the Holocaust was a punishment for Jewish sin. Another reason why the Orthodox were against Zionism. The 1.5 million Jewish children, the infants whose brains were bashed against walls, what sin did they commit? I cannot abide this concept of a monstrous, vengeful torturer God. But how could he? How could he? One day, the answer flopped onto the sidewalk at my feet during a visit to Wall Street, the financial district. For what purpose? I have no recollection anymore. I just remember standing there, Reb Jew on Wall Street at the end of the 1950s, in my strimal and my kaftan, and nobody is even noticing. Barely 15 years after the yellow stars were sewn to our chests, and here there was no engagement beyond a few glances. No one to knock the hat off my head and kick me to the curb. No one to approach me for a blessing or a word of advice. Nothing, not even a Jew to reproach me for looking too Jewish. Oddly enough, in their indifference, I felt the Almighty's indifference as well. Worse, I felt encircled by the coils of the accuser who prompts heresy in the despairing heart. I confess this, as I returned to the subway, there was no heaven above my head. Then along came this blind woman up the subway steps, a young, slight creature tapping a white cane. She passed me, and I stood still, and then I turned and followed her quietly back up those grimy stairs. And I saw as she tapped her way across Wall Street, how nearly every person in her path was transformed. The women felt protective and tried to assist her. The men saw her vulnerability and felt perhaps a little ashamed. All of them made space for her. All became a little more gentle. All were moved by her tap, tap, tap to count their blessings. At that moment, God's presence flowed everywhere, and I was able to recognize his overwhelming mercy for the human race. I saw how the Holy One fishes for our attention. He doesn't simply strike us all dead as sinners, as we so often do deserve, but instead sends blessings as well as blight and suffering to our left and right, in hope of arousing our souls to joy and to pity, both. It seems that the Holy One would pay nearly any price for this, for the awakening of the human soul to the divine presence. I believe it is a hunger that God feels, a form of nourishment that God has required since the creation, with the Jews serving as his fishing bait of choice. Our devotion, our suffering, our involvement in trying to redeem this world, it's all fishing bait to hook the soul of humanity. And with this blind girl, God was still fishing. As she ventured into an office building, I double-timed my steps and pushed open the heavy glass door for her. "Thank you," she announced, with her eyes floating upwards. Upwards. "Excuse me," I said, "but would you mind telling me your business in this building?" "Oh, I'm just delivering a message to someone." Those were her exact words with which I flew back to your father in Brooklyn. "But the fish are not biting, Hyman." That's what the Rebbe said to me. After I shared my revelation with him. "Do you see a repentant world? Do you see human beings blessing the Holy One as they wake up and lie down? No, we see idolatry grown larger than ever. The almighty dollar, the egotism, the sexy, the mindlessness, the self-satisfaction, the greed, all of it, everywhere." Here the Rebbe placed his huge hand on my shoulder, as he often did, to press his wisdom into my body. "The Holy One must still be very hungry, Hyman, and more than 2/3 of his Jewish minnows have been consumed in Europe. What comes next then? Atomic war? Etc., etc." In which the rabbi finally says, "There's only one alternative. You and I must make more Jews, more fishing bait for the Almighty, but we must do it quickly." So more seriously, I mean, this is...
Wait, I have to say, some atheist, huh?
All right, this is not my theology. This is my character's theology. But fundamentally, it always comes down to whatever feelings about Israel. Jews will always say, "Glad it's there, survival, protection. I don't want to be a victim anymore." So two questions arise. One is Israel really protecting us? Israel's protecting Israel, where there are 7 million plus Jews, I understand. Is Israel really protecting us? Do people feel like more secure as Jews because of Israel? I'm skeptical of that. And the second question is, and it's really hard to articulate, is like, if it's going to be victim versus victimizer as Jews, if that's inevitable, which are we going to be? Which do we opt for? And I have to say, I want the Judaism that says, I'm the victim, not the victimizer. I do.
Got it. And I reject the dichotomy. I reject the dichotomy. And I'm going to care for myself and my people and for humanity. For me, life is lived in concentric circles. There's the people I care about the most. In other words, blood is thicker than water for me. Because it is. There's the people I care about the most. And then there's the next circle of my identification. But I have to, and then there's the next circle, right? The wider circle of humanity and the planet, right? Those are all circles I feel nested in. So my task, as I see it, is not to make any of those circles impermeable, not to pretend that they are impermeable, because that's baloney, right? There's no hermetic seal, especially in an age of global climate disaster. So, but while I embrace these larger circles of my concern, I will not reject my inner circles of concern. I just won't do it. And I don't care how off the, it's like for me it's family. And I'm committed to my family. So I have to somehow live with this horrific series of developments that we're being experienced over the recent decades. And still not, and I can't pretend that I don't care about my people more. But that doesn't mean I don't care about everybody else too. And I find that to be an incredible challenge. Also a challenge because I think we humans aren't wired for the global era. I think literally, I think our capability of who we stay connected to is limited in terms of our physical sense of connection. And then we have to move into this conceptual realm, which is really hard to maintain, especially when we feel under assault. So we are in a really challenging situation. But I reject the victimizer and victimized dichotomy, and instead I'm going to inhabit this place of concentric circles of caring as my Jewish identity. And that's a different framework. So that's my response to what you had to say. And again, I want to reject binary dichotomies entirely in this conversation. And let me say a couple words about that. Revolutionary ideologies are binary, right? There's the victim and the oppressor. There's the before and after. They're messianic, right? They're messianic in their nature because they want to end history as we know it and transform it. And the power of these binary kind of ideologies is they're motivating, right? The danger is that it becomes us versus them almost immediately, and everyone has to be in this camp or that camp. And in early Zionism, up to this day, we see the effects of this. There was this, as I said at the beginning, this idea of the negation of the diaspora in order to create this new Jew who would be strong and muscular and able to defend himself, right? And that continues to this day.
That is so much the problem.
Right. In addition, another of the binaries of Zionism that made a good slogan is a land with no people for a people with no land, right? It was a delusion. Right? Not all Zionists
We're deluded.
held this way, were deluded this way, but, slogans sell, everybody, right? It's tough to, it's like, I want to say, moderates of the world unite. People who actually can see both sides of a situation. But that doesn't make for sound bites, and it doesn't make for people willing to lay their lives on the line. And so, I would also say that today's anti-Zionism, which is a product of the anti-colonialist ideology, is also a revolutionary ideology. It wants to divide the world into victims and oppressors, and you're either one or the other, and we want to be on the side of the victims, not the side of the oppressors. And so Israel is an oppressor, so it's all two-dimensional. And so one colleague of mine said, early Zionism negated the diaspora. Many wanted to negate the diaspora. Many wanted to negate, and still to this day, these voices are large in Israel and abroad, negate the Palestinians. They don't exist. They don't have any legitimate rights. It's like they negate them in favor of, and then there are anti-Zionists who want to negate Israel. I want to propose to you that none of this is a solution. That in fact, any ideology that's binary may be motivating and make you feel like you're on the side of the right, but it's bullshit, okay? Because it's not reality. It's a schematic imposed on reality that makes us not see nuance. And I want to propose that instead of negation, we affirm the right of the Jewish people to live in safety and self-determination in their homeland, and affirm the right of the Palestinians to also, no matter how unbelievably impossible this seems, to also live in safety and self-determination in their homeland.
But it's not going to happen,
I want to add
Jonathan.
one thing, and affirm the right of Jews who to live anywhere in the world that they want to, in safety, without having to apologize. It's like, I want to say, this is the position I stake out. I'm saying yes and to all of these.
But push it to the edge. I believe that the Palestinian cause is a lost cause. I believe the Palestinian people at best are going to be like the Lakota people in the Dakotas, on a reservation, shattered, full of social problems because of all the trauma, that the maximalist, Zionist, Orthodox, whatever you want to call it, militarism is going to win. It's going to damage Israel because a lot of bright, good people are going to leave, and etc. But I think it's a lost cause. So deal with that. Deal with that as a hypothesis. So you're no longer able to say, oh, and also the Palestinian self-determination.
I am the patron saint of lost causes. I don't know how else to walk in the world right now, except to stand up for what I think should be, find my allies wherever they are, including in Israel. There are plenty. There are plenty of Israelis who share this perspective of mine. We know it's a lost cause. What is the alternative? If I care, as I expressed, about the survival of my people a lot, then we know that there are enemies waiting to destroy the Jewish presence in Israel. It's like, it's just true.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I'm living in the midst of a tragedy. I'm doing everything I can to not become depressed or disconsolate so that I can continue to function as a loving human being, engaged. And I'm doing it in this way.
So, part of the tragedy is that a generation of young Jews, no longer so young. You know, I used to edit Jewish Currents magazine. It's now edited by people in their 30s and 40s. I take absolutely no credit and I have absolutely no influence for whatever that magazine has become. I want to say that. Don't blame me for it. Don't credit me for it. But those folks were all raised with this sense of Israel as at the center. And they were so deeply disillusioned that they're now obsessed with damning Israel in a way that I never was. To me, Israel had a column in the magazine, but the purpose of the magazine was the cultivation of a diaspora identity. And I would say here that the true response to the lost cause, the true response, you know, unfortunately, your concern is, I don't want the people in Israel getting killed. You know, I'm not worried about American Jews the way I am about Jews in Israel being killed.
At present, no.
Right.
And it's my nieces and nephews.
Yes, I know. I understand that, and so I wanted to turn it to you folks with. I said earlier, and I say again, that the cultivation of a dynamic diaspora Jewish identity.
Right.
The turning away from the teaching of, hey, young person, go to Israel, it's the place, you know, is very important, because otherwise, in this voluntary Jewish identity world of ours, we're also, bright people, are going to be leaving our ranks. And that would be sad for me, again, because there's a mission to being Jewish. You know, 75 to 80% of the Jews of America voted for Kamala Harris. No other group except black women voted as liberally, and no other group ever does. And that's what I want to preserve, because I'm an American. I want Jews to continue to be the rock of liberalism in America. That's really why I'm involved, I confess. It's just Judaism then seduced me into saying, oh, you know, it's pretty cool. But the original motivation was, so I would like to ask you folks to name someone from your lifetime, someone Jewish that you particularly admire, and why. And while you're at it, what fundamentally moves you? How do you see Judaism and or Jewish identity, an essence of it that seems most important to you? If that's of interest. Barbara.
Barbara, we're handing around a microphone so the people on Zoom can hear us.
By the way, there'll be discussion. When this ends, there'll be half an hour for.
No, we don't have half an hour anymore, so we have 23 minutes, so we'll make sure we shut up soon.
Okay.
I became involved in Jewish life, Jewish congregational life, when I was at least 60 years ago. And I was very influenced at the time by a book called Judaism as a Civilization.
Mordecai Kaplan.
What has happened and how did it happen that the civilization is now a place and not a concept and an idea of how to be Jewish and how to practice Judaism? That's the part that's missing for me. To me, the civilization is the idea of Judaism, the values, and that's what's confusing me about what you're saying.
Well, that's more like a statement of the nub of what we're saying, I think, than that we're not addressing it. The question is Jewish civilization, as Kaplan defined it, being fulfilled by Israel's presence in the world, or in fact has the nation state made it harder and harder to be a civilization that we can relate to?
Well said. Yeah. Warren.
Thank you. Last time I was in Israel was with Rabbi Jonathan over a decade ago. It was a disappointing experience. 2 years ago, I went to the Hebrew Institute at Middlebury. It was a disappointing experience. At Middlebury College, okay, language school. My question is a demographic one. When I was listening to you talk, it was a very Ashkenazi, American, Western European perspective. if you look at the demographics in Israel, it ain't the Israel that we all grew up with anymore. The Ashkenazi are part of the population. My children I consider to be parts of a mixed marriage, because wife number one was definitely Sephardic. And the question is, how do you account for the demographic issues in Israel? Because if you look at Israel today, leave the Tzabar question out, you have Mizrahim, you have Sephardim, you have people from Yemen, you have people from Iran, you have people from former Soviet Union, and people of dubious Jewish identity all living there. And then we have to talk about 20% who are Palestinian Arabs. So how do you work those numbers and also think about the issue of what did people in Yemen or Morocco or Iran think about Zionism in 1945?
This is a whole class series that Warren is proposing. So what I want to say is, I'm not going to answer it in detail. What I want to say is, I'm astonished that Israel even came into being. There are Jews who speak literally 70 different languages, who either out of desire or running for their lives or because they couldn't get in anywhere else, wound up in this new entity called Israel. And it's it's a radically different culture there than our familiar New York Ashkenazi Jewish comfort zone, right? Because there are Jews from Iran, Iraq, Yemen, Ethiopia, North Africa, former Soviet Union, Greece, go on and on and on. And none of them are Ashkenazi. The Soviet Union Jews are Ashkenazi, but they had 3 generations of being denied any access to Jewish learning or life. So they're their own category too. So Israel is a kind of astonishing, unmanageable mess. Because in addition, there are the 20% of the population that are not Jewish who are citizens of the state. Yeah, I love it there. And that's another thing that I can't justify, defend. It's just, I'm in love with Israel.
Go ahead, please.
When confronted with lost causes, it's always good to look for sparks of light.
Well said.
I would like to remember not the current government of Israel with Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, but the previous coalition that was governing the state, which included an Islamist party. This is the closest anyone in the modern time has come to a nation state that decided to be universalist. Why have we forgotten that success?
I think there are, so that's correct, if you recall, until that government existed and was a transformational moment for a year and a half. There are two things I want to say about that. I think we forget because Israel has been, this is not the only reason, Israel has been vilified and demonized in the same way that Jews have been vilified and demonized, so that it becomes again a two-dimensional feature of the landscape of good and evil. But also because because Israel's democracy is so degraded because it rules over a Palestinian population in the West Bank who have no rights in the society and are operating under military occupation. And that doesn't apply to the 20% of non-Jews who are citizens of Israel, but there's very legitimate grounds to be profoundly critical of Israel's democracy, which is a very degraded democracy at this point because of the occupation. And there seems to be no capability within Israel to overcome the forces in the society that endorse and enforce that occupation. There are many people who want to, but they're unable to.
I love the conversation, thank you, and I love the way you've described Israel, especially the diversity, okay? And there's so much horror going on our college campuses, everywhere we look, every news article. How does this kind of information, the way you've described it, get disseminated? How do we get this information? And I don't think there's an answer to that, Rabbi, but
Right. All I know, and I'm not a politician, I'm a rabbi, is relationships. And relationships are time-consuming and labor-intensive. And so that's what I mean about the forces of society that are sweeping us along are much greater than any of us can overcome. And so I don't have the answer. All I know is that I'm determined to continue to relate to everyone I meet in a way that opens a channel of communication rather than closes it. That's all I can do.
Yeah, I want to tell people the book club at the moment is reading Tablets Shattered by Joshua Leifer, which is a real eye-opener in terms of the history of how American Jews got to where we are. I think a good analysis. I think the politics is right. What he left out was Arthur Waskow, who's my Rabbi. And one of the ways you could get into active Jewish identity from a politically progressive beginning point. It was for me. But I want to say we are going to ask Joshua to make a conversation with us in the future.
Oh, good idea.
He's taking a PhD at Yale, and right now he's in Tel Aviv studying, so that's interesting right there. But we've talked to him about it, and we are going to have him, it'll be Zoom because he's in Tel Aviv, sometime this winter.
Oh, you want to hear that? You want to hear Joshua Leifer?
Yes, and there was the Institute for Jewish Spirituality just had an interview with him, which is online somewhere. I'm going to find it because I registered for it. So he's out there, he's talking to people, he's worth hearing on some of these issues. I want to make just one or two little personal observations for which I have no answer. I went back to Quaker meeting finally after many years of not doing it because my rabbinic spiritual director said, "Why wouldn't you?" And I said, "Because I feel it would be disloyal." And she said, "What's disloyal about it?" And I've been sitting there wrestling with an octopus week after week. One of my
Wrestling with what?
wrestling with an octopus.
Oh.
I'm sitting there trying to come to some kind of settlement. One of the places I'm trying to find a settlement with is, I'm an atheist. I'm non-Zionist. What is my loyalty? What is my wholehearted loyalty as a Jew? And I'm trying to figure it out. I don't have an answer, but it's there, and I know that. And one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation is because I'm a diaspora Jew, and what does that mean? And I'm 99% Ashkenazi, and I know about the rest of it, at least a little bit. So what does that mean? The other comment I want to make is that there were two people in meeting this morning who have come before, very dedicated pacifist Quakers who wear keffiyehs. And I was thinking about that today and the way in which I experienced the keffiyeh as a slap in the face. And it makes me want to put on a Jewish star. And what I asked, I didn't speak today, but they always do this. Have you been thinking about something that that didn't quite come to the level of oral ministry? What I was thinking about is I don't understand the difference between solidarity and taking sides. I want solidarity, but we keep being pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed to take sides. And my answer to that is no.
Thank you, Judy. You'll get your chance. You walking over this way to Meg? Yeah, great.
Good.
Hold on, Zoom people. Thanks, Judy. Judy, I really appreciated those comments.
Thank you. I really want to first say thank you so much for this conversation. And I did listen to Joshua Leifer through the IJS, who archives everything that goes on, if you just go to their website.
Institute
for
Jewish Spirituality,
Spirituality.
jewishspirituality.org. I work with them a lot.
Yeah. So he's a 30-year-old who wrote this book.
He's only 30?
Yes.
Oh.
And what I got out of it, Alfred, I want to say, and I think about your great nieces and great nephews, because I remember when you said at the very beginning, I was so impressed. You said you make a point of only speaking to them face to face, like a Zoom or a. Remember
No, I
you said.
go there whenever I
Okay, but even all right, whatever. But you to maintain the relationship. Okay, everyone here in this room remembers what you're talking about, Alfred. The students on campus today, when they came into some kind of political consciousness, Bibi Netanyahu, that is all they know. I mean, Joshua Leifer was making this point, and he was distinguishing a little bit between the millennials or Gen X or Gen Z and some of the differences. But the basic thing is, we have this memory. Why don't we remember? Because the activists today have no memory of it. Absolutely none. All they've known is Bibi Netanyahu and this horrendous right swing. And what it reminds me of, unfortunately, is that we are all acculturated to the binary. You are a Democrat or a Republican. I remember the Adlai Stevenson button on my dad's jacket, okay, I was 4 years old, whatever, but and we see it's gotten so bad, this nation state binary, that all the good that's done by one, then we're experiencing it. He's not even empowered, he's turning it all over, So it's just all of these problems are so huge. But I just want to remind us that, we look at things that are going on campus. We're talking about 18 to 24-year-olds. They don't have any of the memory, any of the attachment to Israel that we grew up. If we grew up in the 50s or 60s, it's a total different story.
Thank you, Meg. A couple more, and then we'll wrap up. So, Karen, you decide who to call. Or we'll just...
For me, it's an issue of tribalism, which I think preceded nation states, and what tribes are ascended when in the world. As a diaspora Jew, I feel like a member of a tribe, and that's a major part of my identity as a Jew and as a human being. I was last in Israel with Rabbi Jonathan, and it was an inspirational experience to me because I was surrounded by people of my tribe, no matter where they came from in the world. I knew that I was part of this tribe of Jews, and it was terrific. So in the concentric circle construct, I see being a member of this tribe to be a major anchor for me. And I can be part of other experiences and cultures, but that's always an anchor. And I just wanted to throw that into the conversation.
Since I'm here.
Nice to see you.
Well, first of all, I just want to say, when I speak to my cousin, and she lives outside of Tel Aviv, and sometimes she'll call and I'll say to myself, oh, she's at an airport. And then I realize what's going on, are the planes flying overhead, and just thinking about how I would feel if I would be, like I'm afraid to go to Israel right now, and so that, I'm just at least saying that, the fear. And then the other thing, the reason the reason why I love Israel, I only went once, was because I love the Torah. So when I'm there, I feel like my feet are on the ground of where everything started, where my ancestors started. But that's all. There's nothing else going on. So, so since I had it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi. In response a little to amplify or expand on what Meg was saying. So I have two kids. They're 31 and 27. They went to Camp Ramah Nyack. They went to Camp Ramah Berkshires. We helped start the Solomon Schechter School of Manhattan, where they also went. There are a lot of kids like them. It's not just they only remember Netanyahu. They feel that they have been lied to. There is this whole hashtag, you never told me. The Palestinian, let's just say side, I hate, I'm a lawyer, I'm a word person, but I don't have time to think of one right now. But the Palestinian narrative has been stifled forever. And now it has come out, and kids finally are learning, or they are learning, that there is another side. Read Stranger in My Own Land by Theda Yurvis, whatever. Read, excuse me, for God help me, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Ilan Pop. Whether you agree with all of it, it's just there is another side, and kids feel completely betrayed. They feel that, they get one-sided Israel education, and also to your point that you made really early on that I can't remember exactly, it's all about Israel. For non-Orthodox Jews, that is such a key part of their identity because many of them, for whatever reason, they're not religious. Judaism is not part of their daily life. It's all about Israel. So when people slam Israel, they take it in the gut and there's a knee-jerk reaction. No, we have to stand up for Israel no matter what. But one reason you have these demonstrations on campus, I mean, let's face it, some of these kids, they don't know from what river to what sea, okay? They chant it and they have no idea. But a lot of them, some of them do. And they really feel they've been sold a bill of goods. And I don't think that we, whoever we are doing anybody, including ourselves, any favors by the same knee-jerk reaction. Oh no, the Jews lived there all along. Oh no, there never was the Palestinian nation. Oh no, the Palestinians were not there. Whatever. We're not doing ourselves any favors because those are not the facts. And kids are learning that. That's it. So
Well said. Well said. Karen, what should we do? It's almost 2:30. Okay. I know, but I want to praise you all for expressing yourselves so clearly. We are not, we're all in this mess together, and we don't have to rip each other apart in order to hear each other. And we just don't have to do that, even though we're so scared and so wired by so many things that we want to lash out at somebody, but we don't have to do it with here. And you're doing a beautiful job. We're gonna make some closing comments. There's some refreshments. We actually need to be out of here by 3 today because of various other commitments. So maybe we'll figure out a way to keep talking with you all. Larry, what do you want to say?
You go first.
Okay. I will. Okay, so I want to praise Larry because I don't disagree with him. We're coming from different experiences of Jewishness, but they're very interconnected. Part of the reason so many young Jews feel like they were lied to is because they weren't given a Jewish education with the content of Judaism's moral mission, right? That being Jewish means something beyond an identity tag, right? And so Larry and I have both been working the same field our whole careers. I'm a rabbi. I'm here to invite people into the lifelong journey of Judaism as a life-giving, 3,000-year-long conversation about what it means to do the right thing, right? And then it's not just a conversation; it's also a celebration. It's a relationship with spirit. It's a full-bodied, full-spirited experience that the more you dive into it, the more it enriches you. And that's been my mission as a rabbi, is to invite people into that three-dimensional, life-giving experience of Judaism. I can't do it all over the country. I could only do it in one place. And to the degree that I was able to, we grew complex and full-bodied Jewish identities here. That included, I made sure to take regular trips to Israel, because I felt like if you're going to develop a full-bodied Jewish experience, then you had to get your ass to Israel and see what it feels like to be there and meet the people there. These weren't indoctrination trips. I think anyone who was on my trip will agree. We met with people from across the political spectrum. We always went to the West Bank and met with Palestinians. It's like, and I would say at the beginning of the trip, my goal is that you leave this journey more confused than when you came in. But you'll also have a fuller experience of Judaism and Jewishness. The last thing I want to say is, I came up with a slogan: messiness rather than messianism.
It's nice.
I'm in favor of messiness versus messianism. Messianism involves a sense that that you're headed towards a defined, clear future where you know what's right and how to do it and how we're going to get there. I'd rather embrace reality. I am not a believer in a supernatural plan. I would rather embrace reality, which means figuring out how to do this within the mess and keep going forward together. So that's the last words I want to leave you with. Messiness, I'm in favor of messiness, again, instead of messianism. I like that.
So I'm going to do everything Shakespeare ever wrote in 1 hour show. I'm going to read you 36 reasons to be radically Jewish as quickly as I can, to hopefully leave.
This is Larry's artwork.
To hopefully leave you a sense of inspiration and good stuff about being Jewish as we leave the. So it's a Jewish start. It has legend, culture, resistance, wisdom, holidays, and history. I'll start with legend, and I'm going to go fast. Do it the best you can. Because the first Jew, Abraham, was an idol smasher. Because that idol smasher even argued with God about the injustice of collective punishment. Because the most basic theme of the entire Jewish tradition is liberation. Because Jacob had to be humbled and lamed before he could become a mensch. Because every member of the community had to stand at Sinai to receive the revelation. Because every half-century debts are forgiven and land is restored. Culture. Because Allen Ginsberg howled. Because Bernstein, Sondheim, and Robbins made of their hands one hand. Because Barbra Streisand sang about people and didn't get a nose job. Because Emma Lazarus lifted her lamp beside the golden door. Because Lenny Bruce kept on cursing. Because Yip Harburg and Harold Arlen carried us over the rainbow way up high. Resistance. Because Anne Frank still believed in human goodness after 2 years in hiding. Because Dr. Janusz Korczak refused to abandon his orphans in the Warsaw Ghetto. Because Rosa Robota and 3 other young women smuggled dynamite into the Auschwitz death camp to launch an uprising in 1944. Because Israel has honored over 24,000 non-Jews for their heroism in rescuing Jews. Because a teacher named Shalom Cholavsky led a group that set fire to the, I don't know how to pronounce it, Nijrij ghetto in 1942 and fought the Nazis in the woods for 2 years. Because Jewish history teaches that racism is a path to murder and misery for all of us. Wisdom. Because if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? Because while I'm not expected to complete the task, neither am I permitted to desist from it. Because giving money to the poor is said to do more for the giver than the receiver. Because the main responsibility, we are told, is not to study, but to act. because we are warned to be, quote, cautious of the ruling power, end quote. Because if there is no bread, there is no Torah, and if there is no Torah, there is no bread. Holidays, because the Sabbath is there to remind us what it means to be human. Because we have to reconcile with people before reconciling with, quote, God at Yom Kippur. Because we are told to go camping and see the night skies at Sukkot. Because Hanukkah reminds us to spread light even at the darkest times. Because we get to honor Harriet Tubman and sing Go Down Moses every Passover. Because we are told to share our wealth before each celebration. And finally, history. Because Clara Lemlich demanded a strike and launched the 1909 uprising of the 20,000. Because Betty Friedan, Betty Naomi Goldstein, wrote The Feminine Mystique and awakened millions of women to the call of liberation. Because Bill Mardo and Lester Rodney campaigned for and won the integration of Major League Baseball. Because more than a third of white civil rights activists who went south in the early 60s were Jews. Because Abby Hoffman dropped dollars on the New York Stock Exchange floor in 1967 to expose the system for what it is. Because Gay Pride Day was launched by a Jewish bisexual woman named Brenda Howard. 36 reasons. Which I'd love to give to the synagogue, you know. So thank you for being patient. As ever, I'm sorry there wasn't more time for discussion. But
I love that I got to talk so much, and I'm sorry you didn't get to say everything you wanted.
All right, and I want to thank you both so much for being here. Thank you, Judy, for making this happen. And just so that you know, next weekend we have a guest, a Shabbaton, a guest rabbi coming, Rabbi Nachshon Carmi, who was here over the summer and did a discussion with us called Arguments for the Sake of Heaven. And he was very excited. He lives in Florida, and he misses, he's never really experienced 20-degree weather. So he asked, can I come in December? And so he's going to be with us all of next weekend. We're going to do a beautiful Kabbalat Shabbat service with him on Friday evening with Cantor Rachel and me. And then we'll do a Saturday morning service, and he'll be part of that service and do some teaching. Then we'll have a Kiddush and a lunch, and he will do a teaching with us during that Kiddush and lunch. And then next Sunday, 10 a.m., we're going to have a brunch here, and he's going to have a good conversation with us about Israel and Jews and how we relate to all of that. So we can continue this conversation with Rabbi Nachshon next Sunday. So I really hope that you'll come. He's an Israeli American, and anything else you want me to say about him in his behalf?
It's just really wonderful to see, for those of us who were there last June, this is exactly 6 months later. And that kind of helped split open a conversation.
All right. All right, so I just want to repeat what you're saying. So he was here last June, and we just want to continue a conversation that was very fruitful then. Let's see where we are now. It's 6 months later. And so I invite you all, please come and to check our calendar. And also at the end of the month, we're going to have a beautiful concert, a fundraiser for the congregation, Hanukkah.
I'm doing a concert on the 29th right here.
At 6 p.m., so hope that you'll come, and might be some surprise guests.
Yes.
Might be. And anyway, it'll be a great evening, and thank you all for being here today.
If anybody wants the Hanukkah gear,
Oh, yeah.
selling books for $10.
Buy Larry's book. I love this novel. And let's keep loving each other, okay?
last year. And that's great. I do have copies of it. I'll write it up for you. Go to this website and visit the art section, and if it's not there, no, I didn't. If it's not there, call